Every luxury brand sells you the same promise. Spend more, signal more. But at the very top of the watch world, that equation quietly inverts. Past a certain point, spending more money makes you look like you have less taste, less confidence, and, strangely, less money. This is not a video about cheap watches beating expensive ones on paper. That video is easy and mostly dishonest. This is about something subtler and more useful. There is a specific category of watch that wealthy men buy precisely because they are wealthy, and that category makes them read, to other people who know watches, as new money, insecure, or trying to be seen. And there is a quieter category, often costing a fraction as much, that does the opposite. By the end, you will understand the exact mechanism behind that inversion. You will be able to look at a wrist and read what the owner was actually thinking when he bought it. And you will know which 5 watches to leave in the display case and which 5 to reach for if the goal is to look like the most secure man in the room rather than the loudest. Here is the uncomfortable part first. The men getting this wrong are not fools. Many of them are extremely successful. They earned the money that bought the watch. So why does the instinct betray them? Because most buyers are still running the logic of every other purchase they have ever made. Bigger house, better car, more expensive suit. In almost every category, price and prestige move together in a straight line. The watch world is one of the few places that line bends back on itself. Above a certain threshold, the audience that matters stops being impressed by the price and starts being impressed by the restraint. And nobody tells the new buyer this, because the brands make more money selling him the diamonds. So let us start with the watches that make it worse. 5 that can make a genuinely rich man look broke, or at least look like he is faking it. Then 5 that do the opposite. The first is the fully diamond set sports Rolex. Picture a Datejust or a Daytona with a factory set, or worse, an aftermarket diamond bezel and diamond dial. The buyer appeal is obvious. It is the most recognizable luxury watch on earth, and diamonds are the universal shorthand for money. On paper, you have combined the 2 strongest status signals available. The overlooked weakness is that you have combined the 2 most counterfeited things available. Rolex is the single most replicated watch brand on the planet, and diamond set pieces are the easiest to fake convincingly, because glittering stones hide the details that expose a fake. Watchfinder, owned by the Richemont Group, has said publicly that it could once spot around 80% of fakes on site, and can now identify only about 20% visually, because modern replicas have become so good. Which means the more diamonds you wear, the more your real watch looks like the fake version of itself. You paid a genuine premium to acquire the specific look that costs $300 on a street corner. A verified point of comparison. A steel Rolex, Datejust 41, reference 126334, has a US retail price of roughly $11,650 and trades on the secondary market around $14,000. Fully gem-set Datejust configurations run well into the tens of thousands. You are paying multiples more for the version that reads, to a trained eye, as less certain. The plain one whispers. The iced one is doing something else entirely. The genuine drawback of my own argument here, a discreet, small factory diamond dial on a precious metal dress watch, is a legitimate, old money look. Context decides. But a blingy steel sports Rolex on a business wrist rarely lands the way the buyer hopes. Hold that idea, because it returns at the end with a different meaning. Which brings us to the second offender, and it escalates the problem. The heavily branded fashion house watch. The watches from famous fashion labels priced like real horology, wrapped in a logo you already recognize from handbags. The appeal is instant recognition. The weakness is that recognition is the whole product. Inside many of them sits a movement that costs the maker very little, dressed in a case that costs a great deal. You are paying couture prices for department store mechanics, And anyone who knows movements can hear it the moment you mention the brand. Which sets up the obvious question you are already asking. How do you tell the difference from the outside before you have spent a cent? I will give you the exact framework in a moment. Third, the oversized, overcomplicated tourbillon from a brand with no watchmaking heritage. A tourbillon is a rotating cage that was invented to fight gravity's effect on a pocket watch's accuracy, back when watches sat still in a waistcoat. On a wrist that moves all day, its practical accuracy benefit is essentially theatrical. In a respected house, a tourbillon is a demonstration of craft. On a 50mm case from a brand founded to sell exactly this, it is a demonstration of budget. The buyer thinks he is signaling connoisseurship. He is signaling that a salesman found him. Fourth, the precious metal chronograph worn by a man who has never touched the pushers. The weakness is not the watch. Many are superb. The weakness is the mismatch. A working complication worn purely as jewelry announces that the function was never the point, and that undercuts the one thing money cannot buy, which is the appearance of actually caring about the object. Fifth, and the most counterintuitive of the five, the hyped, weightless steel sports watch, bought at double gray market price, purely to have it now. Here, the watch itself is often genuinely excellent. The thing that makes the owner look poorer is the story attached to it. Paying a 50 to 100% premium to skip a waitlist tells everyone that you needed the object more than you needed to be sensible with money. The very watch that is supposed to signal that you have arrived instead signals that you are in a hurry to prove it. Real security does not pay a scarcity tax. Remember that phrase. Now, before I give you the 5 that do the opposite, here is the promised framework, so you can apply all of this yourself in a boutique or on a listing tonight. Ask 4 questions of any watch in this order. 1. What is the movement, and did the brand actually make it or buy it? A house that manufactures its own movement is telling you where its money went. A famous name over a generic bought-in movement is telling you where its marketing went. 2. Is the complication being used or displayed? A dive bezel on a diver, a chronograph on someone who times things, reads honest. The same function worn purely as decoration reads as costume. 3. What is this watch trying to make other people feel? If the honest answer is impressed by the price, it will usually achieve the opposite with the people worth impressing. 4. Would this still make sense if the logo were hidden? If the entire value collapses the moment you cover the name, you did not buy a watch. You bought a billboard, and you are the wall. That 4th question is the whole video compressed into one test. Every watch in the second half passes it. Every watch in the first half struggles. So here are the 5 that make a rich man look exactly as secure as he is. First, the plain steel Rolex on a leather or simple bracelet, no diamonds, no gold. A no date or a plain date just or an Explorer. It is the same brand as our first offender, stripped of everything that was working against it. It says, I can obviously afford the loud version, and I chose not to. That single implied sentence does more status work than any bezel full of stones. The plain steel version costs less and signals more. That is the inversion in one object. Second, the tool watch from a serious maker, worn by someone who uses tools. A steel dive watch with real water resistance, a real rotating timing bezel, on a wrist that goes outside. Its value is legible without the logo. It reads as competence rather than acquisition, and competence is the one signal wealth cannot counterfeit. Third, the understated dress watch in steel or a modest metal, thin, clean, 2 hands and maybe a date. The kind of watch that slides under a cuff and never announces itself. This is the deliberate opposite of the 50mm tourbillon. It says the man wearing it does not require the room's attention, which is precisely the impression that expensive tourbillon was trying and failing to buy. Fourth, and this is the surprising one, so sit with it, the genuinely excellent watch from a brand most people have never heard of. An independent or a lesser-known maker with real finishing and an in-house movement. To a stranger, it reads as nothing. To anyone who knows, it reads as the most confident purchase in the room. Because the owner bought craft with no expectation of applause. He spent the money where it could not be seen by amateurs. That is the definition of buying for yourself. And it is the highest status signal that exists, precisely because it refuses to signal. Fifth, and strongest, the honest vintage piece worn with obvious wear. A watch with history, a little patina, clearly owned rather than acquired last Tuesday. It cannot be about showing off, because showing off requires newness and recognition, and this has neither. It can only be about taste. And taste is the one thing on this entire list that no amount of money can purchase directly. That is why it wins. The portion most likely to backfire, and that most buyers cannot tell which portion is which. So return with me to where we started. Two men in a room, the $40,000 wrist and the $6,000 wrist. The expensive watch genuinely provides craftsmanship, brand power, resale strength, and, sometimes, real mechanical art. Those are not nothing, but a large share of what the loud buyer paid for is the signal. And the signal is the part that betrays him, because it broadcasts need. The quieter watch provides most of the same craft, sometimes more, and adds the one thing money cannot be seen buying, the appearance of not needing to be seen. Measure what you can measure. Movement, materials, finishing, water resistance, resale. Pay for those with clear eyes, but understand that the emotional half of the price, the part that buys attention, obeys a rule that runs backwards at the top of this hobby. The man who looks richest is almost never the one who spent the most. He is the one who spent enough and then stopped because he had nothing left to prove. If you would rather choose watches by movements, materials, and what they actually say about you than by how big the logo is, subscribe, because that is the only kind of comparison this channel makes. And next time, the harder question underneath all of this: which of these watches actually hold their value when the hype fades, and which of the loud ones quietly collapse the moment the waitlist disappears? Because looking rich and staying rich are not always the same watch.